greetings to our friends in different countries, Father. I just bless them right now in Jesus' name. Thank you for joining us on the video, and I pray that the word would minister to you very powerfully in Jesus' name.
Not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
I want to go just a little bit of what we were talking about last week.
He told me.
Believe the works. Believe me that I am the Father. I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. And we talked about different ministries and what works they had done. And some looked awesome, and some not as much. And so I just want to review a little bit. Jesus said, if you're not getting the words, look what I'm doing. And some of us say, yeah, but you know, that's what has been bothering me. It doesn't look like I've been doing much. Look at it like the Lord looks at it. Because sometimes the really small things to us are the really big things to Him. And so, going on, it says, do our works to glorify the Father. In John 14:13, it says, and whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You know, you're asking and Him doing it is to glorify the Father. That makes us be a little more careful what we ask. Because there's a reason for asking. And He goes on to say, if you ask anything in my name, I will do it. That's not what the baby Christian believes it is. You know, is it an open slate? Yes, for the man of God, the woman of God. For the baby Christian, you need to grow up a little bit, and then you'll learn what to ask.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Not looking to bust any bubble. I'm just looking to say, you know what? Let's ask that the Father may be glorified, and that when we ask anything, He will do it. And He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You see, that's all part of the same program. Continuing on, do not let your hearts be troubled. John 14:1-4. Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms or mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you that? I am going there to prepare a place. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. And you know the way to the place where I am going. And what did we say earlier in the service? We know the way? Yes, we know the way. What? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The only way to the Father is through Him. And so we do know the way. And you read this scripture, it goes on. He says, hey, Thomas, you mean you don't even know me just yet? Thomas said, well, show me the Father, and it'll be all right. He said, have you seen me? Thomas said, yeah. He said, well, then you've seen the Father. Do you know me? Yeah. Then you know the way. What did it say earlier? Do my commandments, right? Now, if you know that He's going to prepare a place for you, it should bring some hope, I would think. I mean, that's pretty awesome. You know, this may not be going the way I think, and that may not, and this may take a little longer than I thought, and all these things together, it's just like, you know, could we get on with some things? But there's a hope in the background that you don't want to overlook. He went to prepare a place for you, and if you study that out, it's talking about in my Father's house there are many mansions. And if you study the word out, it's not talking about rooms in a house. That's not the best translation in the world right there. Many mansions, you study the word mansion, and it's talking about estates. There's many estates in my Father's grounds. And I'm going to prepare an estate for you. That's different than preparing a room. You know, a room, you think of an old folks' home where you're locked in a room, and that's, yeah, you get your breakfast and dinner and lunch, and, you know, that's just life goes on, kind of. You know, but, you know, on an estate, you go out back and go fishing, right, Jared? Yeah, and you go out there and cut some wood. Yeah, Dennis? You get some barbecue roast going out in the back. I mean, you bring your friends over. That's a whole different thing than having a room. And not only that, it's the King of Kings saying, I know what you like. You watch what I make for you. How long did it take Him to make the heavens and the earth? 7 days, right? You know how long He's been working on your mansion? Think that over for a little bit, okay? Do not let your hearts be troubled. Ephesians 5:26 and 27. It says that He might sanctify and cleanse the church with the washing of water by the Word. So when we spend time in the Word, us as the church are being washed. That He might present her to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. That's some powerful stuff right there. And so now, as we think on these things, I want to just remind us of the things we've been talking about last week. As we were talking about these different ministries and how they did what they did, and some of them seemed like they were really great and then they crashed. Other ones seemed like they went the wrong way. That should do it. Thank you, Mom. I'm going to try it today with the mic to see if it's better or worse from the other week without it, since the camera's way in the back. But I gave you quite a few examples, even last week, of myself in my own life, which I don't do that very much, but sometimes the Lord asks me to do that. And I was actually arguing with him a little bit this week, and he said, by the word of your testimony. Okay. Don't argue with the Lord, he always wins. Because he knows, you know? And so some of the stuff that looks to me like it's been a challenge and so on and so on, I don't talk about it very much because it's like, whatever, you know? But it is there, and it is the past that we walked in and so on. And if you look at it in the right light, it can actually be a blessing and encourage people along the way. Unless you've been out there and just completely making a mess of things and haven't turned around. If you were completely making a mess of things and have turned around, that also can encourage people in the right way. Does it make sense? Yeah. And so as we were talking about, you know, our friend with the sailboat, and the difficulty that he had because, you know, basically the church never backed him up. And things kind of fell apart, and then they came back together, and then they fell apart, and so on. And ultimately, he lost the boat, lost his family, lost all kinds of things. But what I'm saying is, it don't have to go that way. Say, yeah, but the church. Yeah, but it still doesn't have to go that way. Yeah, but they should have or we should have. It still doesn't have to go that way. We have a choice. And when we stand with the King, we can make it. We can make it. And it can look awful and terrible and not go the way we think it should. We still can make it. As the word says in Zephaniah 3:17, it says, the Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness, and he will quiet you with his love. And he will exalt over you with loud singing. And you're saying, well, yeah, I thought you were talking about making it. That's making it. That's making it. Listen what it says. Where do you think you are in this particular picture? It says that the Lord your God would be in your midst. That's pretty awesome. When the Lord himself says, I want to be with you. He says, a mighty one who will save. What is salvation? It's whatever you need now. That's salvation. Sozo. Complete package. He, the Lord, will rejoice over you in gladness. He's excited about you. Well, how could that be? I never did nothing too heroic. Be careful about that. He paid a huge cost for you. Don't you go saying you ain't worth nothing. I'm trying to get my English a little better. Don't you be saying you are not worth something. Sometimes when I get too many slang words in there, I get my friends overseas tangled up. What did he just say? He said, you ain't worth nothing. That's my southern coming out, okay? It says, he will rejoice over you in gladness. In other words, there's something he's happy about. When you walk the walk before him, when you try, he makes the way. When you walk the walk that he made the way for, he's rejoicing over you in gladness. Is that cool? Wow. And he goes on to say, and he will quiet you with his love. How is it when you're with one you love? You can be at peace. You don't have to worry about him. You don't have to be stressed out. You're with the one you love. And it says, and he will quiet you with his love. Is his love perfect? And he said, I will quiet you with that. So he's rejoicing over you. He's quieting you in his love. And listen to this. He will exalt over you with loud singing. He's getting up and dancing and singing. How about you? Say, no, you had to make that up. No. I should have that on the screen for you. Zephaniah 3:17. Write it down, go home, look at it, think about it, read it over and over and over. It's a true story. It's part of the Word. Okay, said all of that, I want to go on to a little bit more about what our family walked through. And again, this is because I'm told to do this. I prefer talking about somebody else. I prefer talking about the Word. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time saying, well, I'll tell you what, this is how we did it. Because some of it doesn't look so all that exciting. And looking back on it, it wasn't exciting. But this is how it goes. I told you the other week, that we finally went into a full-time ministry. We felt like we were supposed to, so we did. We stepped into full-time ministry. As we stepped into full-time ministry, we had this group of people, for what reason I have no idea. They didn't seem to take a great interest in us before, but we stepped into this full-time ministry, and these people said, "What are you doing? What are you doing going full-time in the ministry?" I said, "Well, we feel like we're supposed to." They said, "Yeah, but who's backing you up?" So, well, I wasn't looking for somebody to back me up. I just, in our prayer time, the Lord said, "You're supposed to do this." "Yeah, but you have to have some wisdom about this." I said, "Yeah, but I'm doing what you preached." That was the wrong answer. They didn't want to hear about that. But literally, we were doing what, and I was young and dumb. I actually took a tape and played back to them what they preached. That was the wrong answer. I shouldn't have done that. They preached exactly what we were doing. And yet they said, "You shouldn't do that." You said, "That's a whole different story that already passed, but that's how we started in ministry." Some people could say that was getting off on the wrong foot. And so it started out that we did some traveling, but mostly supporting other ministries. Lifting up their arms, helping them with meetings, doing whatever they needed done. Anything from working on their car to going out there and setting up chairs with them to just being there when everybody else left and just making it work for them. And we enjoyed it. And they enjoyed it. And most of them were no names. We were no names. So we just got it on, no names together. It was all right. And so the interesting thing is, at that time, I was doing multiple trips to Cuba back on the sailboat. And I say, "Whoa, that had to be fun." No. This little boat was not made for sailing on the ocean. It was made for sailing in the bay. And it wasn't made for hauling cargo. It was made for playing in the bay. And we had 4 or 5 pastors and a boatload of stuff. How many pounds, I don't know. I just know by dollars because we were taking medical equipment and so on. A couple $100,000 worth of eyeglasses, medical equipment, things for the doctors. Because interesting enough, in Cuba at that time, I don't know it now, I haven't been there for a few years, but at that time, if you were a Cuban and you went to the hospital, you didn't get medication unless you brought it. Where are you supposed to get medication if you're a Cuban? And so the services were the somebodies and the nobodies, and most of the church were the nobodies. And some of their medical facilities for eye care and so on were that far advanced that people would come from other nations. But it wasn't for the local people. In fact, the local people were treated really, really bad. So you went to the doctor, you needed to bring your own medication. That's a little challenging. There's not a drugstore on every corner. In fact, the stores that are on every corner, most of them are closed most of the time. And all of them are government run. And I just visited with some people recently that were in Cuba just 6 months ago. And they said, yeah, they got to go into one of the big stores. They were looking for provisions. And they said that there were aisles and aisles of rice and beans, but they were all the same bags, all the same rice, all the same beans, the whole way down the aisle. So if you waited 6 hours, as they did to get into the store, you had your choice of rice and beans for 2 or 3 aisles worth, and that's all there was. And you come out after waiting that long, you need to get some petrol for your car, and the gas station are already closed because they're out of petrol. And I know how it is. When we were there, we had to get gas. Apparently our driver knew the system. I didn't. But you drive into the petrol station, and of course they just shout out that they're closed, there's no gas, if anybody's even there. And but they will point. And so you go back around the corner somewhere to a back alley, and you whistle, and the guy sticks his head out, "Need some petrol?" And they say, "Okay, that way." So you go that way 2 blocks, and the guy comes out with the can and fills up your car for whatever, and fills up your car with 5 gallons. You don't ever fill the car up. And so you've got your gasoline. Where did it come from? That's a whole different game. When they filled up the government trucks, they would put 12 gallons in the government truck and 2 gallons in their can, and that's how they would get gas that they could survive otherwise, because the government has made laws that you can't possibly live if you do the law correctly. And they did that on purpose, knowing that you will break the law. And they will turn a blind eye to you breaking the law, unless they want to get you for something. And then they'll say, we wouldn't do this to you, but you broke the law. And throw people in prison, bulldoze their house, and so on and so on. When you're in prison there, you're in prison and your family has to bring you food, or you die. And so it's a different place. And so all that said, I was running the boat back and forth to Cuba with pastors and so on. And we got through the one time, and they started checking our boat out really, really thorough. I'm thinking, oh, we've been here before. This is a little odd. They had 5 sets of customs officials came aboard. And then they started taking up floorboards and pulling out, just taking the boat apart. And needless to say, they started finding our couple thousand pounds worth of goods that we didn't declare. You said, you went to Cuba and didn't declare? Yeah, we did. If you declare, they relieve you of it. So if you want to take anything for the church, you can't declare it. If you go into a country without declaring things, they tend to want to take it from you if they find it. And so it's a risk you take to support the church. And so after many unusual and harsh words, they unloaded 2 truckloads of stuff off of our boat that we didn't have. And they took it off to a holding place. And the only thing that we were left with was our own personal bag of clothing. And the interesting thing is, as we left for this trip, all these pastors were bringing cases of Bibles and cases of eyeglasses and medication and the stethoscopes and all the doctor stuff. And I'm thinking, I ought to bring something. And things were a little lean financially at the moment because we didn't have a great number of people backing our ministry, did we, Mama? Not that I noticed. And so anyway, we didn't have much of any money, but I knew how to sail boats. So I was going along because I knew how to sail. That's the only reason I was invited. And I thought, I got to bring something. And so I was going to take my, whatever, $200 or whatever it was, and buy a case of Bibles. And the Lord said, no. I said, well, what should I get? And in my prayer time, I was like, would you get a couple of study Bibles like you use? Thompson's Chain Reference in Spanish, study Bibles. Well, I like Thompson's, I could do that. And so I go to get Thompson's Chain Reference study Bibles in Spanish, in leather-bound Bible like I use. And what is it, 3? I think 3. I didn't tell the story for a long time. I could buy 3 Bibles with all of my money. I'm thinking, that's embarrassing. We're taking thousands of pounds of stuff, and Captain here, he's bringing 3 Bibles. Yeah. I didn't tell anybody, man. I stuck them in my clothing bag. Okay? And we got over there, we got checked out really bad because we found out that from high command a word came down that small sailboats are smuggling arms into the country. So every 15th boat, no matter if it looks perfect or looks terrible, you take it apart and make sure there isn't no small arms aboard. We were number 15, thank you. And so they took all our stuff, except our bags. Guess what we had to give out? 3 study Bibles among the 5 pastors. That's all we had. My 3 Bibles. I felt a lot better then. Hey, mine's the only one that got... I still wasn't impressed with myself, but it's like, hey, at least I had something to give. And the interesting thing was, the Lord had laid out already who gets these things. I had no clue. We met a guy in Havana, and he said, my brother-in-law just got saved, and he lives in the middle of nowhere. Everybody talks about the middle of nowhere. This was the middle of nowhere. If you could find it on a map, which you can't, it would be labeled middle of nowhere. We drove down through creek beds. We drove up the side of mountains. We drove places where only horses went with this little old Russian car, and we pushed it about as far as we drove it, but we got there, and we got there like late at night, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, just starting to get dark. And we pulled in. Here, the guy didn't even know we're coming because the communications were down like usual in Cuba. Welcome to Cuba. And so as we pulled into the driveway, we went up and knocked on the door and said, we know your brother-in-law from Havana, and he said you accepted the Lord and you would be encouraged if we stopped in there and just gave you the word. And boy, this guy got excited. He said, yes, come. And they brought us in. And I'll tell you what, we're there talking, having a nice time, and I'm noticing people are going up and down the street, banging on doors. I'm thinking, it's like 10:30 at night now, but you could see them banging on doors. And here people started coming with their jackets and their hats and all. I mean, listen, dudes are coming all dressed up. It's like hot. And yet they got their coat and their hat and all their stuff on. They heard that somebody came to town to talk about Jesus. And they were middle of the night, middle of the week, and nobody knew we were coming. Yeah. And within 2 hours, the house is full of people. Man, we're having a prayer meeting, a worship service. We're having a good time. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, they said, come, we need to show you something. This was, you had to understand, this was after a major drought. No, this wasn't a drought. This was hurricane. 2 hurricanes in a row wiped out their rice crop 2 years in a row. And so they literally were starving. At 2 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of nowhere, they didn't know we were coming. They took us to another house down the street, which was their church. Their church was made out of logs that they cut from the woods, and they carved them out by hand and put them everything together by hand to make their benches. That was church. And they had a mound of rice there on the table like this high, and it had meat in it. And they said, this is for you, you must eat. It was the hardest meal I've ever eaten in my life because I understand a couple of things. Number one, once or twice in a year, they get meat with their rice. This rice had meat in it. And secondly, they were already starving, and they're getting huge portions. Said, eat, you must eat. Wow. I thought, guys, we wanted to bring you food, but they took it all from us. And so we enjoyed the food. About 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, they said, you need to get some rest. You need to go to the next town to preach, which we did. And so this was a 2-bedroom house that had 3 families living in it. They gave us both bedrooms, 2 pastors in one, 2 pastors. There was only 4 of us that time. And we slept till 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, just a couple hours. When we woke up, their worship and praise service was still going on because somebody came to talk about Jesus. And on the way out, the Lord says, this man gets one of your study Bibles. Thinking, wow, what a pleasure to be able to help him. He said he's an educated man, and all he has is one of them little New Testaments to teach from. Because when he got saved, a man from Haiti came over and preached the gospel. Now, this guy's in the middle of nowhere in Cuba, and he called the guy that preached the gospel a hick. So you know where he came from. He came from a really small town in really the middle of nowhere. And so the hick gave him a little testament, and he was preaching the gospel out of that little testament. He had 80 people in his church, and it was only there for about 2.5 months because they came by and they said, listen, you used to be a major in the Secret Service, and you had it well. You laid down your gun and picked up a Bible. Tell us about it. He said, okay. He told them they got saved and he had a church. But he had only that little testament to teach from. And when I gave him that study Bible, you couldn't have impressed him more with the dump truck backed up, unloading the gold, like I said they're going to do here. It's interesting. I never thought about that before, but we mentioned that earlier. So we'll watch for that. But he was that impressed with God's Word and that excited about it that I'm thinking, wow, to be able to be a part of that, what a privilege. What an amazing privilege. And it happened 3 times. The next time, we're headed for the next town to preach that night. We didn't make it. We're pushing the car again. So we pushed it into the village. And they said, we need to find an auto mechanic. And the Lord said, no, you need to find the preacher. So I told them, I said, we need to find the preacher. They said, okay. So we went and found the preacher. And they asked him, do you know the auto mechanic? He said, yeah. So he lined us up with an auto mechanic. The mechanic's underneath the car taking the back axle apart. This is like Dennis this week. He was taking the rear apart because the bearings were gone. And so he took the rear apart. He said, we need this particular bearing. The pastor said, I'll be back. And he hopped on his bicycle and he's going riding. And he goes out through the village there, just a small village. We're not in a city. And he said, I was asking the Lord, he said, where can I get these men of God a bearing for that little car? And he said, the Lord directed me down this street and down that street. And he said, then turn into this man's driveway. And he said, I pulled in the driveway. I walked up on the front porch. He said, the front door, the screen door, and the back door were open. You could see right through the house. He said, there was nothing in there except the table. The table was empty except for one little box. And in that little box was a bearing that fit our car. The perfect bearing. He said, and so I told the guy I'd buy it from him, and he said, I think you wanted too much. He said, I'll pay for part of it. I said, no, we can pay for the bearing $5. And so we bought the bearing, got the car going again, and the Lord said, this man gets a study Bible. And I come to find out this man had sold his little motorbike and got a bicycle so that he could be completely out of debt so he could serve the Lord better. And he pedaled all over the place, up in the mountains and so on, to these different churches and just preached the word to them. And the study Bible was extremely valuable. His wife started crying. She says, listen, I want to tell you something. She said, she called to her husband, Pastor. She said, Pastor, just last night stood up before the church. And he said, I've been praying for many years. The Lord would bring me a study Bible. And he explained the Bible. He said, it looks like this, and it looks like this on the front, and it says this down the back. She said, that's the Bible? I said, wow. There's no words to explain being used by God like that. It's absolutely astounding. You think, wow, all I could buy is 3 study Bibles. Yeah, but there's 3 dudes really need a study Bible. And the story goes on, the next guy, he had gotten thrown in prison for preaching the word because he had too many people in his house church. He had a little house church, he got saved, he told the neighbors started saying, hey, what's going on? So he told them, well, everybody started coming to his house church, and you ain't allowed to have a house church with more than a few people. And he ended up with 2,000 people coming to his house church. And every Thursday, it would totally shut down that part of town. And so the authorities came out and said, you can't have a church. He said, I don't. He said, yes, you do. He said, no, I don't. They said, well, what's all these people coming out? He said, I just teach the word, and they just show up. They said, well, you can't do that. He said, I didn't tell them to come. They said, well, you can't do that. Well, they kept coming because they wanted to hear the word, and he ended up going to prison. And interesting enough, when he was in prison, he had gone from, he was a guy that worked in the office. And so he wasn't used to the outside heat and farming and all that. And they put him on forced labor. And then their family has to bring him food. So he's on forced labor, and he's thinking, man, he said, I'll die doing this. And that was their hope. And the Lord said, no. He said, no, I got you. And the guards of the prisoners started coming in and said, listen, talking to the other prisoners, you work like preacher works. He can work, man. He says, that was a gift from God. And the bottom line is, a long story short, it ended up that people in the prison started getting saved. Well, that really annoyed them. And so they decided that maybe they should do something about this. And so they went to have a court hearing. And at the court hearing, thousands of people showed up on the steps of the courthouse. And they decided they better let him go. And they gave him the official stamp approval that he could have his own church. Which, as far as I know, is the only one since Hitler came into, not Hitler. What's he doing there? Castro, since Castro came into power. As far as I know, it was the only church that came, because you weren't allowed to have a new church, you had to have an existing church. And who knows, maybe they gave him an existing one, I don't know, but he was legal. And again, he got to receive a study Bible. He said, wow, it's amazing. And so was one of our trips. The next trip I went on was really exciting, man. We went with a brand new load of stuff, brand new churches to give it to, all kinds of excitement about going to Cuba. Went across in a storm. It was nasty. That little boat, we were underwater as much as we were above water. I mean, everybody was seasick except me, so I got to sail the whole time. Woohoo! And so we finally got there, and as we came in, we come to find out something very interesting. We actually knew before we left. We just thought it might be a positive thing, not a negative thing. We got there, the Pope arrived. Well, that's cool. But we found out because the Pope came, people from all over the world came to Cuba. And they could fill their hotels without having any Americans there. And it was a perfect opportunity for them to say, Americans can't be here. If you have an American passport, you got to go. Because their hotels were already full and it didn't cost them any money. See, they're okay with Americans as long as the money's flowing. But the money was flowing, so they said, as of now, right after we showed up, no Americans can stay. Well, our one pastor on board had a German visa, or a German passport. They said, he can stay. Well, you can't stay unless you stay in a hotel. The hotel was a couple $100s a night, and we didn't have that amount of money. And so that, long story short, is one Millie tells many times about when we were stuck in customs for what? A long time. Many days. Millie thought it was a month. It wasn't a month, but we were there quite a few days. And then finally, when they decided that we do in fact have to leave and we can't stay, period. They kicked us out in a storm. We said, well, we declare safe haven. They said, no, you're a sailboat. You'll be okay. And so it was either the storm or the AK-47. We figured the storm was a little milder than the AK, so we headed out to sea. And we fought a storm for over 17 hours on that trip coming home. We were coming home loaded, man. How annoying is that? We're taking water over top of the boat because we're loaded on the way home. Anyway, welcome to Cuba. That's my Cuba stories. And there's multiple more, but that's enough for tonight. And interesting enough, in the middle of all that, coming home from Cuba, Millie was coming to pick me up in our van. We had two vans, one really nice van and one okay van. And the Lord, a couple of weeks earlier, asked us to give the really nice van away. I said, couldn't it be the other van? No, it needed to be the really nice. So we gave the really nice van away to a needy family. And they had brand new tires, brand new battery, all kinds of, it was ready to go. It was a really nice van. And so it was all good. They were happy. Everything's good. And Millie's on the way to pick me up, coming back from Cuba, in the old van. And some dude runs a traffic light and destroyed it. Fortunately, she wasn't hurt, but the van was hurt. It was totaled. And so, long story short, they decided, some very unknown reason, that, well, we're not quite sure what happened, so we'll let each insurance company take care of your own vehicles. We didn't have a,
Collision.
we didn't have a collision on that buggy. It would have cost more than the truck cost. So basically, our truck is destroyed, and that's it. So we had no vehicle. And the interesting thing was, she came pick me up anyway. I wanted to remind her where she's driving Mom's car. And excuse me, come to find out that we no longer had a vehicle. And Stephanie and Amy were pretty small. We're living in a little house with not too much. I told you about getting groceries and all that stuff. You remember that story?
But we also would have been in the vehicle, but then because I think one of us wasn't feeling good, we both ended up staying with Grandma instead of being in the vehicle, and it was a far better outcome.
It was a gift from God that nobody else
Yes.
was in the vehicle because it got
Correct.
hit really hard.
Yeah,
And this guy just blew through the intersection full speed and destroyed the truck.
yeah.
So, all that to say, not long before that, we were that much out of money that we were out ministering with that truck, out of gas. You remember that story? We went and the Lord filled up our gas tank, brought us back. We ministered, had a good time, came home, and the whole table was covered with groceries. And our house was locked. It was still locked, but the groceries were all there. Groceries on the table, groceries on the floor, groceries everywhere. I said, wow, man, God is good. But that's the exciting high points. There was weeks in between there, it's like, hang on, Mama, this is a wild ride, And then the truck gets destroyed, and so there's no way to go back and forth to teach and preach. So I'm riding my bicycle. I thought, well, that ain't so bad. My buddy in Cuba's riding a bicycle, and I'd be teaching and preaching in the States. And the States is different. The States has a very high opinion and outlook on those teaching and preaching the gospel in lesser nations. But the States don't have a very high outlook on those teaching and preaching the gospel in this nation unless they have a big church, and so on. And so the interesting thing was, I'd go to preach and teach on my bicycle. I went to pick up groceries on my bicycle. I went to mail our newsletters on my bicycle. And as the weather's turning cold, one day I'm out there riding and it started sleeting and freezing rain on my bicycle. I'm thinking, this is getting to be too much fun. And so, interesting enough, at that same time, our refrigerator went out in our house. I thought, okay, just add two here, add two, It's like when you're downbeat on the guy. So we said, it's cold outside. We got an ice box, we got all our stuff outside, left it in the ice box so something wouldn't eat it other than us. And that was our refrigerator outside. So that works. And then our oil tank went dry. And so it's like, okay, so we'd scrape together $5 and we'd buy a 5-gallon can of oil and bring that home, and we could use it once in a while. We mostly had those little heaters that you set around in the house. And it was kind of rough. And riding the bicycle, and we teaching and preaching. And then one day, I was preaching, and I mentioned our friend in Cuba. That this guy sold his motorbike to be out of debt, and he's out there preaching and teaching on the bicycle. These guys said, whoa, what a man of God. How could we get in there and help this guy? This guy is awesome. He's a man of faith. I said, well, I can connect you with him. I said, the guy, he's a good man. I said, he's in the middle of nowhere. I can't connect you by mail, but when they run down there, they can take something with them for him. They said, well, that's great. We'd love to get behind this guy. And long story short, it came out then that I rode bicycle there to preach. They said, you came on the bicycle? I said, yeah. What'd they say about the Cuban guy? What a man of faith and power. This guy's out riding his bike. He just believes in God. What'd they say about me on my bicycle? Hey, you nutcase, get a job, man. What's the matter with you? I mean, what, you came with your bicycle? Get a job, be somebody. Interesting, huh? Welcome to the United States. Anyway, life goes on. On my way home the one day when it was sleeting and raining and carrying on my bicycle, the Lord told me, He said, you will never need a car again, ever. Very short while, somebody gave us one. We had given multiple cars away. And by today, I don't know how many, multiple cars have been given to us. How many do we have right now? 6. Some of you guys overseas, I know that's a bunch of cars. We have 6 vehicles, right? Yeah, we do. 6 vehicles.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is 4 of them need work right now, but that's a whole
Cutting else up.
different story. So anyway, I haven't been in need of a car, and we have driven since that, and didn't have to go preaching on the bicycle. I didn't mind it, but it's interesting that you get shunned because you ride the bicycle in the States, and you get honored because you ride the bicycle in Cuba. What's the difference? We treat people really stupid, you know that? Anyway, continuing on, about that time, the Lord said, I need you to help this company out because they need somebody to help them teach. I thought, well, I enjoy teaching, that's no problem. Here, they're teaching pole climbing. They came to me asking me, I told you a little bit about this the other day. Pole climbing, I'm saying, gracious, I've never climbed a pole in my life. And they want me to teach pole climbing. I said, okay. I said, what makes you think I can do that? They said, well, you know how to teach technical rock climbing, you did that? I said, yeah. I said, a rock isn't a pole. They said, well, we think you could do well. Would you consider going to school? I said, I'll do that. So they sent me off to school. I came to school with all my certificates and stuff, and they sent me straight out to teach pole climbing. So now I just learned how to climb that week, and 2 weeks later I'm teaching. But that's a little awkward. And as I'm teaching, I'm only 40 years old or so at the time, and they think I'm ready to retire because I have white hair and stuff. And so they're saying about us retired guys got to stick together. I said, yeah. But long story short, it went extremely well. As I was teaching pole climbing, they said, could you come back and teach basic electronics? I said, I'm not certified in that. And so they called my boss and said, could you guys teach some basic electricity, basic electronics? Could you teach telecommunications? And the boss said, well, let me check. He sends me off to college for electronics and communications. And, you know, I learned fiber optics before I learned the basic electrical end of it. Nobody ever does that. They usually end the electrical end for 20 years and then they learn fiber optics. I came out of college from fiber optics one weekend. The following weekend, I was in the West Coast teaching teachers how to teach fiber optics. And they sent me the wrong books. And so I had to learn the whole new book over a long weekend and start on Tuesday morning teaching the teachers how to do fiber optics. And man, I was pretty shook up. So I'm asking the Lord, how do I do that? He said, you just do what you do. I got your back. I taught that for 2 weeks, and when I got back home, I got cards and letters and stuff coming into the company. He said, this guy is good, man. Where did you find him? We could tell he's been in telecom for years. I said, they didn't hear that from me. I did not say that. I was real careful what I talked about, because I was in that particular area of telecom for 2 weeks before I got to teach it. Just right after I graduated, it was off on the airplane. Anyway, it went that well that I ended up teaching the entire gamut of telephone, from the basic electricity to regular old, as they call it, POTS lines, plain old telephone, through all the way through fiber optics, and how to troubleshoot, how to hang it up, and I enjoyed it. And it went extremely well, so well that the company I worked for built a huge building with a arena area that we could do all inside telephone pole climbing. We could do inside cable hanging. We could do all inside with a running track around the top. And all the proceeds came from me teaching. One other guy taught a time or two in a month. He basically was in the office. The 2 of us made that company that much money. They built a huge building with proceeds from us too within about 2 years. But wow. I said, that's cool. I had no problem with that. But then they started saying, you know what? We need to hear, we need to hear, we need to hear, we need to hear. And it was no longer a couple of days, 1 week, a month, because I'm refreshing leaders, right? That was the agreement when I started there. Now it was that tight that I would fly home on a Saturday afternoon. Sometimes I get home till Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon I'm leaving on the airplane. Multiple times I'm saying, no, this isn't working. I'm still refreshing leaders, remember? They couldn't understand that, so I quit. And so, interesting enough, the telephone companies came to me. I said, yeah, I quit, right? I don't work for them. Oh, we're not interested in that. We want you to teach. I said, yeah, but I don't work for them. They said, well, start your own company. So I said, okay. So I started my own company, and I would go out to them and teach and come back, and that was working real well. And it looked like the other company just built this huge building. It looked like it'd be really smart to build my own classrooms. So I built my own classrooms, and the week the classrooms were finished, I had inside poles, I had the wires hung in there, I had different stations to teach the different parts of telecommunication. It was pretty nice. And that week, the very first class I had in there was September 11, 2001. And we watched the airplanes on TV crash into the towers. And I'm thinking, that's really awful, but I had no idea what that would do to the telecom industry. And within the next 2 years, we were upside down for over $250,000 and closed the classrooms. And so I had absolutely nothing to show for it except a huge debt. And people came to me and said, why did you get out of the business? I wasn't known to explain that. But sometimes you look back and say, well, that was a crash and burn. 5 years of your life and $250,000, what do you got to show for that? So I thought, well, they got a point. So I'm telling the Lord, that was a crash and burn. 5 years of my life, $250,000, I have nothing to show for it. He said, whoa, stop. He said, did you do what I asked you? I said, yes. And first of all, I said, then what are you complaining about? And yeah, you got a point. And he started to point out, he says, do you remember, and there was multiple things that happened in those 5 years. There's a guy out in the parking lot in Sacramento, California, got saved right there, went home to his son who was dying of cancer, and the guy got healed by the time he got home. God was doing some cool stuff, man. I was teaching this guy how to climb back in the telephone poles. He was supposed to be a teacher when he got home, and he's so dangerous he's about to hurt himself. So I took him aside, I said, what's going on? Found out that the doctor, right before he left for school, and the company said, you need to go to school and pass this or you lose your job. So he went to school, but the doctor, right before he went to school, brought him into his son's room who had brain cancer. And the doctor explained to him, if you, Father, would have brought your son sooner, we could save his life, but he's going to die and it's your fault, and send him off. And so this guy's carrying all the weight of this, his son dying on his shoulders, and he's trying to learn how to climb a pole. Climbing a pole was the furthest from his mind, and he couldn't climb worth a flip. And so finally I talked to him and found out what's going on. I said, listen, you don't belong here. You need to be home with your family. And I checked with him and said, do you know the Lord? He didn't. So I introduced him to Jesus, and that was awesome. I mean, this guy, man, he brightened up. He stood tall. He's like, 1,000 pounds went off of his shoulders. I said, and now we need to pray for your son because the Lord cares about him. He says, yeah, but the doctor said, God is bigger than that. And so we prayed for his son right there in the parking lot on break time, out in the telephone parking lot. And he headed home on the next airplane back home. 5 years later, when I was in my own classroom, in my own class with one of my students in there, I found out he came from that Midwest company that this guy was part of. I said, do you know this guy? And I said his name. He says, yeah. He said, I work with him. I said, well, how's he doing? He said, he's doing really good. He said, he got religion. I said, really? He got religion, huh? I said, well, how about his son? I heard his son was pretty bad. He said, yeah, you wouldn't believe that. He said, the doctor made some kind of mistake. He said the guy was off on a training thing and he came back home and the doctor said they couldn't find the tumor. It said the son was fine. Send him home. He's doing great. I said, so he got religion and the son got healed. How about that? The guy said, yeah, it makes no sense at all. But he wasn't ready to talk about the Lord. But it was interesting that years later I found out how it worked. The Lord didn't talk about that. I thought if anything went right, that did. It's another day. We were teaching up in northern Pennsylvania, right on the New York line. And this girl was in there, and she had something to prove, man. And I'm not down on girls being pole climbers, but just be one of the guys. Don't prove something because you're a girl, okay? She had something to prove, a serious chip on her shoulder, and she's climbing beyond her ability. And by the end of 2 or 3 days, she is completely worn out, and she's making stupid mistakes. And we wear an arrestor on a harness, so if you fall, it catches you like a seatbelt. But she was very, very quick, and she cut out, meaning the gas blew out at the top of the pole. And you got to understand, we're climbing brand new blackjack poles. Blackjack poles, when you get into them, they bleed green. That green is an insecticide that makes your eyes burn and get your wrists all messed up because of a reaction to it. It's nasty. It kills anything that tries to eat it. It's a bug killer. And so we're climbing brand new blackjack poles. This is 3 days into it, so they are gaffed up like every time you gaff into a pole, it puts a big old splinter out like that. These things are gaffed up for all the guys for 3 days. And she cuts out, she blows out on the top of the pole. And you think, oh, that's no problem. That arrestor will catch her not that far. She was that quick, she grabbed that pole and hugged it and slid the whole way down. It tore the sleeves off of her shirt. She had splinters in her arms that were huge splinters. She took her 9mm, her 9-inch pliers to pull the splinters out of her arms. She was a gnarly thing for sure. And I said, you need to get medical help. She wouldn't do it. And so she went home, came back the next day. She had leather on, long sleeve leather. And that day, the whole group took me out to lunch. And we're chatting about this and that, and she was there, but she was mending. The Lord wouldn't allow me to talk to her directly and pray for her. He said she wouldn't receive it. Back in my room by myself, her wherever she was overnight, the Lord said, you pray for her from your room, I can reach her where she's at. And so I prayed for her, and I saw no difference the first day. At lunchtime, the guys took me out to lunch, and they said, talking about all kinds of stuff, talking about racing cars and flying balloons and flying airplanes and rock climbing and everything except pole climbing, because these are a bunch of gnarly dudes and they want a big story. And so this one guy, he pipes up and this is lunchtime. I can talk about anything at lunchtime, okay? When I'm in the pole climbing class, I talk about pole climbing. But at lunchtime, I'm free game. I can talk. They said, hey, Clair, what's the biggest rush you ever got? I said, the biggest rush I ever got. I said, I'm praying for somebody, laid hands on them, and watched God heal them right in front of my eyes. I said, that was a rush, man. And man, you could hear a pin drop in that restaurant. It got totally quiet. None of the other tables were talking. Everybody, I'm thinking, now why, Lord? Is it nothing? After a while, somebody changed the subject and life went on. The next morning, this girl came into classroom late. We always had a little bit of classroom before we went out climbing. And she said, check this out, guys. She went up in front of the classroom, pulled her sleeves up. Her arms were totally clear. And she climbed the rest of the week with no hassle. You know, after the day was over, one by one, the gnarliest, nastiest, worst-mouthed guys would come to me and want to get things right between them and God, because they saw God do an amazing miracle. God didn't mention that. He didn't mention any of those things. I'm thinking, when you're saying it was worth $250,000 in 5 years of my life, what was it worth it? He mentioned this one guy. When 2001, the September 11th thing hit, this one dude was from Alaska. And everybody went home, some rented cars, some got a ride, and you couldn't fly, you remember that? They all got home, except him, he couldn't get home. He stuck there with me for 2 weeks. I got one guy in my classroom for 2 weeks. Oh my goodness, that's rough. And so we teach everything you needed to teach by lunchtime because there's one guy. And then after lunch, I took him here, took him there, and we went to different restaurants, and I'm babysitting this guy. And so I started talking to him about the Lord. When I'm off the clock, he's mine. And so I'm telling him about the Lord, and he said, oh yeah, okay. And he's on an island in Alaska that is one of the last official Indian reservations. You can't go on there without an invitation. But he lives there. He is an Indian. And so I'm telling him about the Lord. He'd come in the next morning to school, and he said, I was talking to my girlfriend last night, and I told her, and he's giving her the gospel, and he ain't saved. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this guy got preacher written right across his forehead, and he don't even know it. And so he's preaching the gospel to his girlfriend. He ain't saved, she ain't saved, but they're all saying, hey, man, this is pretty cool. I think we can do that. And interesting enough, when he finally went home, he never did accept the Lord. He wouldn't go there, but he was weighing it out. So I would say at best I got a maybe. And so the Lord said, $250,000 in 5 years and one maybe. I said, yeah, how'd that hold out? He says, if it was you, and you were going to spend eternity in hell, and somebody gave you the truth, is it worth $250,000 in 5 years of their life? I thought, for me, yeah, that's worth it. But it was hard to say it was worth it for him, because it was my 5 years and my $250,000. But the Lord pointed out, I said, well, I don't even know if he got saved, and I still don't. But the Lord said, it was well worth it. You gave the man the good news. And so, why am I telling you these couple of stories? I want to tell you something. It may not be awesome, and you may not write a bestseller book about it, and it may not be people say, whoa, and fill your church house full of people. But I want to tell you, if you're right with God, then you're right. If it looked like you just wasted 5 years and every dime you had, you're still right. If nobody comes because you're preaching and say, oh, he's a no-name, it doesn't matter. Preach what you've been given to preach, and it may reach one person, you're still right. When you get a chance to show the power of God, when a young lady gets healed from sliding down a telephone pole, getting all full of splinters, just allow the Lord to do the ministry. I didn't have to say anything. When she showed her arms clear that morning, I'm thinking, okay, Lord, what do I say now? He said nothing. They'll get it. They got it. They came to me afterwards. They're starting to get things straight with God. I said, wow, man, this is something. And so it doesn't go always like you think it might ought to go. And you don't always get to preach to the multitudes. And you don't say, whoa, did you see this? Look at me. There's very few things I can say, look at me about. And most of that history, when we're just living off a dime and a penny, and a bicycle, I'm not terribly proud of that. But we walked it. And I look back on it, I'm not disappointed either, because we were right with God. And we are still here. We ate even maybe a little more than we needed to eat. Nobody's starving. The kids are serving the Lord. I mean, how bad is it? So my encouragement to you is, when you look at the works, not every piece of the works is thousands of people getting fed by a couple of fish and a couple of loaves. Every once in a while, one single blind guy gets healed. And everybody thought you were nuts for putting mud in his eyes. And sometimes you walk the road and what you did minister to somebody and nobody else even noticed that. Because they are watching you. And sometimes it's so far and you're saying that was far too much cost. Say, wait a minute, how much cost did the Lord need to bring you the gospel? If it cost somebody $250,000 in 5 years of their life to give you the good news, is it worth it? For you, it's worth it. For others, it is also. So let's be encouraged. And again, it's not about me. That's just that's my testimony. So, by the word of the Lord and by our testimony, we stand. What's your testimony? If you're a born-again individual, there's things that's going on in your life. There's things that are changing other people's lives because of who you are. So be encouraged. You may not be the one everybody's writing about. You may not want to be the one everybody's writing about. Remember last week or 2 weeks ago when I told you about the guy who's doing all the miracles and stuff in Florida? He took all kinds of garbage, which was really sad. Why? Because he's doing what the Lord asked him to do. I'm happy to say that the garbage level in this house is 0. You guys are extremely supportive. I really appreciate you. We reach out to the nations. It makes a difference. It may not be huge scale. We have the mega churches say, hey, man, how can we back you up? But I'll tell you what, every single one of them matter and count. So let's be excited about God. Let's have an outstretched neck. Let's have great hope, because you watch, change is on the horizon. Amen?
Maybe you would want to tell the one story about the guy preaching in the middle of the jungle, and as a representation of the ripples that one single act can do?
Yeah. I suppose we got a couple minutes. Are you guys ready to go? You got a couple minutes.
In a couple minutes.
our interpreter from Cuba. Super nice guy. German man interpreting Spanish into English. About that. His native language is German. He's interpreting my English into Spanish for them. And he was good. Super nice guy. But he told me a story that was very powerful. He said friends of his were in, I don't remember which South American country it was.
I don't know.
Anyway, a very small, in the middle of nowhere, South American country. And things were kind of harsh, wartime things going on. And he was working in this one little village for, I believe, 7 years. And he was completely tapped out financially. He had nothing left to give. He didn't see anybody getting saved. This place it just wasn't going there. I think when he was there for 7 years, I don't know, if I don't remember correctly, there might have been 2 or 3 people that got saved from his ministry there. And so he's traveling back to Europe. Somebody gave him the money to come back home to Europe. And on his way back to Europe, he had to travel from that little place where he was to another village through a jungle. Traveling through the jungle, in the middle of the jungle, in the nighttime, the Lord said to him, stop the car. Well, that's usually a bad idea, especially when you got militant groups running around and you got things that like to eat people in the jungle and that kind of stuff. And so he stopped the car. The Lord said, get out. He said, that's really a bad idea. He stopped, he got out of the car. The Lord said, preach the gospel. He said, to who? And he's looking all around, and there's nobody. He said, what? He said, I've already blown 7 years. He said, I'll preach. He said, man, I preach the gospel. I preach like there's 1,000 people there. I preach hard. I preach loud. He said, I preach really loud. I didn't want anything coming to eat me, man. He said, I finished up. I prayed the prayer of salvation. He said, I got in the car, and man, I left. And he went home. He was home for about 7 years. He was there 7 years. He was home for about 7 years. 7 years at home, someone else gave him some money. He said, would you like to go back and visit that South American country? He said, yeah, I would. So he got on an airplane, came back, landed in that bigger town, and went right down to the small town where he had been ministering for 7 years to look at if that little small-sized 1 or 2 person house church was still there. And in the middle between the 2 towns, there's this great big opening, and there's a huge village there, and where'd this come from? He pulls off the road, and here he finds the minister's place. He said, where did this little village come from? He said, the minister said, that's an interesting story. He said, I'll tell you what, he said, I was a poacher. I was out taking animals that you ain't allowed to take. And he said, I was just getting back to the highway one night, and he says, some car pulled up and stopped. He said, oh man, he said, I've had it. See, he said, I'm hiding in the bush. And he said, this dude gets out and preaches the gospel. And I'm thinking, man, I need that. He said, I accepted the Lord right there in the bush. I said, Lord, do you care that much about me? He says, I will preach the gospel every place I go. That village sprang up out of preaching the gospel, and they were reaching villages all over that little area from the little village that didn't even exist earlier, because one guy got saved by some dude he couldn't imagine was out in the middle of the jungle, preached the gospel in the middle of the night. The 2 met for the first time. He says, guess what? I'm the crazy preacher. Preached the gospel in the middle of the jungle. He said, well, why did you do that? He said, the Lord told me to get out. He said, well, you preach with a lot of fire. He said, as much fire as I could drink. He said, I didn't want to get eaten that night. He said, you were loud too. He said, I was loud as I could be, man. He said, I want to get back in the car and go. He said, well, I'll tell you what, it's stuck with me. He said, look what we got. I said, isn't that amazing? And so, it may seem terribly insignificant, but do what you're told to do, amen? And so, it may be 7 years later you find out, hey, look what happened to that guy. It was 5 years later I found out, hey, that guy got born again in the parking lot. His son got healed before he got home. And his peers say, hey, he got religion. No, he found the way, the truth, and the life, and he's standing on a rock, man. That's awesome stuff. Jim, you going to close for us? I think you got a good word for us, amen? I'm leaving the mic on.
Proverbs 3. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. think one of the things we're picking up tonight is that it's not our understanding that gets us where we need to go.
Amen.
It's hearing and following.
Amen.
And again in Matthew it says, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one that comes as a child and humbles himself and just trusts in the Father. So take that with you tonight. I enjoyed the evening. I hope you did. And we'll see you again next week. Be blessed.
So you got a service in the hand tonight, man. You got more than you came for, right? Nice. I wasn't planning to go that long, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Very much.
I hope you're encouraged. That's, I think tonight was about being encouraged.